The house was quiet, almost too quiet for a home that had once been filled with laughter and love. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the antique clock on the wall, counting the seconds like a heartbeat. Emma stared at the photo on the mantel, her and David on their wedding day, their faces glowing with happiness. It seemed like a lifetime ago. She remembered the early days vividly. David was everything she had ever dreamed of: charming, attentive, and wildly successful. They met at a charity gala where his sharp suit and easy smile had captivated her. A whirlwind romance followed, and within a year, they were married. The small suburban town they moved to was the perfect place to build their life together. Everyone admired their seemingly perfect marriage, and Emma played her role flawlessly. The doting wife, always supportive, never questioning. But tonight, as she sipped her wine alone in the dimly lit living room, she knew better. There had always been signs, subtle at first. The late nights at the office, the faint whiff of an unfamiliar perfume on his shirt, the hushed phone calls he dismissed as work emergencies. Emma had wanted to believe him. She had convinced herself that he was still the man she fell in love with, but doubt had a way of gnawing at the edges of her sanity. It was on their 5th anniversary that everything changed. She had planned a surprise dinner, but it was she who was surprised. David was late, hours late, and when he finally stumbled in, his tie askew, his shirt untucked, and his eyes glossy with guilt, Emma knew. He didn't even notice the cold dinner or the anniversary cake sitting on the table, candles unlit. He mumbled an apology, something about an important client, and went straight to bed, leaving Emma standing in the kitchen, staring at the remnants of what was supposed to be their celebration. That night, after he had fallen into a drunken sleep, Emma picked up his phone. Her hands trembled as she navigated through his messages. And there it was, a name she didn't recognize, accompanied by a string of texts that made her stomach turn. The messages were explicit, filled with promises and passion that he had long ceased to show her. The name at the top of the screen burned into her mind: Lily. Emma felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under her. She wanted to scream, to wake him and throw the phone at his face, demand answers, but something stopped her. She closed the phone and put it back on the nightstand, her heart pounding in her chest. The anger was there, burning hot and bright, but beneath it, something else took root, a cold, calculating resolve. She had always heard that revenge was best served cold. As she stood in the shadows of her once happy home, she vowed that David would pay. But not tonight, not in a rage-fueled confrontation. No, she would bide her time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. She would become the perfect wife, the loving partner who forgave and forgot, all while plotting his downfall with the patience of a saint. The photo on the mantel blurred as tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. She took another sip of her wine, feeling the warmth spread through her, steadying her resolve. This was only the beginning. The game had started, and she would play it better than anyone ever had. David wouldn't know what hit him, and as the clock struck midnight, Emma smiled, a slow, cold smile that spoke of secrets and vengeance. The perfect wife, she mused, was about to become the perfect avenger. Emma's hands trembled as she held the phone, the screen still glowing with messages that shattered her world. She forced herself to take deep breaths, steadying the storm that raged within her. Every fiber of her being wanted to march into the bedroom, slap David awake, and confront him. But she didn't. Instead, she carefully placed the phone back on the nightstand and walked away, her steps soft and controlled. She went into the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were red, and her cheeks flushed with anger and humiliation. How could he do this to her? The man she had devoted herself to, the man she had trusted more than anyone else in the world, had been betraying her for God knows how long. But in that moment of overwhelming betrayal, something inside her clicked. The anger, the heartbreak, they didn't fade, but they were pushed aside, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Confrontation wasn't the answer. He was a skilled liar. He would twist the situation, manipulate her emotions, and make her question her own sanity. No, she would not give him that satisfaction. Instead, she would become the perfect wife he thought he already had, obedient, loving, blind to his deceit. And all the while, she would be planning her revenge. Over the next few days, Emma threw herself into the role. She greeted David with a smile when he came home, cooked his favorite meals, laughed at his jokes, and even initiated romantic dinners. She watched his eyes carefully, searching for signs of guilt or suspicion, but there was nothing. He was too comfortable, too secure in his lies. He believed she was blissfully ignorant, that she would never suspect his affair with Lily, and in a way, that made it easier for her to keep the mask in place. But at night, when David was asleep, Emma transformed. She began gathering evidence, documenting his every move. She went through his emails, his bank statements, his call logs. She created a secret file on her laptop, meticulously organizing every piece of incriminating information she could find. She started following him, tracking his meetings with Lily. The first time she saw them together, her heart clenched painfully. They were at a cozy little restaurant, sitting too close, their hands intertwined on the table. David's eyes sparkled with a kind of joy she hadn't seen in years. The sight was like a dagger to her heart, but she swallowed the pain and focused on her goal. She took photos, saved every detail, and built her case. It wasn't just about proving his infidelity anymore. She wanted to destroy him completely. And so, she started learning about his business, asking questions, taking on more responsibilities. David, blinded by his own arrogance, welcomed her involvement. He praised her for her dedication, for being the supportive wife he could count on. Little did he know, she was positioning herself, gaining control over assets, understanding the intricacies of his financial dealings. The more she dug, the more she uncovered. David wasn't just unfaithful, he was reckless. There were shady deals, off-the-books transactions, money being funneled into hidden accounts. Emma felt a thrill as she pieced it all together. He was so focused on his affair that he didn't notice the cracks forming around him, cracks that she would widen until everything came crashing down. One evening, after another one of their staged romantic dinners, David had fallen asleep on the couch, his arm draped over his eyes, a soft snore escaping his lips. Emma sat beside him, her heart pounding as she reached for his phone. She knew his password by heart now, had memorized his patterns, his habits. She opened his messages, scrolling past the ones from Lily until she found what she was looking for: emails and texts from his business associates, discussing risky investments and under-the-table deals. She forwarded them to her secret account, her hands steady, her mind racing with possibilities. When she was done, she gently placed the phone back on the coffee table and leaned back, closing her eyes. She had everything she needed to destroy him, but it wasn't time yet. She needed to be patient, to wait for the perfect moment. She had been wronged, humiliated, but now she was in control, and she would savor every second of his downfall. As she watched him sleep, a sense of calm washed over her. The rage and pain were still there, but they were tempered by something new: power. For the first time in a long while, she felt alive, fueled by the knowledge that she held his fate in her hands. David had no idea that the woman he thought he had fooled was the one laying the foundation for his ruin. She smiled to herself, a cold, calculated smile, and whispered into the silence, "Enjoy your dreams while you can, David. They're the last sweet ones you'll have." Over the next few years, Emma perfected her role as the devoted wife, all while secretly preparing for the day she would tear David's world apart. She moved carefully, always one step ahead, hiding her true intentions behind a mask of love and loyalty. Every smile, every affectionate gesture was part of a carefully constructed lie, and David, blinded by his own arrogance, fell for it completely. She became his most trusted confidant, his advisor in both personal and professional matters. It wasn't difficult. After all, David believed he had already won. He had Emma where he wanted her, devoted, forgiving, and utterly clueless about his affair. But it was exactly this trust that Emma exploited, wrapping him tighter and tighter in her web. She started spending more time at his office, under the pretense of helping him with the growing business. David, pleased to see her so invested, began delegating more and more responsibilities to her. She attended meetings, signed documents, and even handled sensitive negotiations. Behind the scenes, Emma was learning everything she could about the business, its strengths, its weaknesses, and, most importantly, the places where it could be broken. Emma also began a secret life of her own. Under an alias, she set up a series of offshore accounts and shell companies. She spent nights learning the intricate details of financial manipulation, money laundering, and corporate espionage. She made discreet connections with people who could help her, people who had no loyalty to David but plenty of interest in the money she offered. Slowly, she started siphoning off small amounts of money from the business into these hidden accounts, just enough to go unnoticed, but enough to build a solid foundation for what she was planning. As the years passed, Emma's transformation was complete. She was no longer the heartbroken wife, nor even the patient avenger. She was a strategist, calculating and cold, and she knew every detail of David's life better than he did himself. And through it all, she played her role to perfection, throwing lavish parties, attending social events, always by David's side, smiling and laughing, the epitome of the perfect wife. David's business flourished, in large part due to Emma's involvement. He basked in the admiration of their peers, oblivious to the fact that the very success he was so proud of was being used against him. Emma made sure to channel the profits into ventures he never questioned, never realizing that each investment was a carefully placed piece of her plan. One night, as they sat in their opulent dining room, enjoying a dinner with a few close friends, David made an announcement. "Emma has been my rock through all these years," he said, raising his glass to her. "I couldn't have done any of this without her." The guests applauded, their glasses clinking in a toast, and Emma smiled graciously, her eyes meeting David's with a look that only he could misinterpret as love. But inside, Emma was savoring the irony of it all. He had no idea that the woman he was praising had orchestrated every detail of his impending ruin. He couldn't see the trap closing around him. Each compliment he received a testament to the meticulous groundwork Emma had laid. After dinner, as their guests departed and David settled into his study with a glass of whiskey, Emma retreated to their bedroom. She opened her laptop and logged into her secret accounts, reviewing the numbers. Everything was in place. The offshore accounts were loaded with more money than she had ever dreamed of, all siphoned from David's empire over the past decade. The shell companies were ready, the documents forged, and the loyalists she had bought were standing by. Emma glanced at the framed photo on her desk, one taken years ago, during happier times. She picked it up, staring at their smiling faces. "I wonder," she whispered to the picture, "if you ever loved me at all, or if I was just another part of your perfect life." But she didn't wait for an answer that would never come. It didn't matter anymore. She replaced the photo and closed the laptop, a calm settling over her. The game was nearing its end. Everything she had worked for, everything she had sacrificed, was about to come to fruition. All she had to do now was wait for the right moment to strike. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual and prepared David's favorite breakfast. As they sat at the table, sipping coffee and reading the newspaper, she casually mentioned, "I've been thinking about taking a more active role in the company. Maybe we should expand our investments, explore some new markets." David looked at her with surprise, then smiled. "You've already done so much, Emma, but if that's what you want, I trust you completely." His words, his trust. It was almost laughable, but Emma nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "I'm glad you feel that way, David. I think it's time I take on more responsibility." She watched him leave for the office, his back straight, his step confident. He was a man on top of the world, completely unaware that it was all about to crumble beneath him. Emma stood by the window, watching as his car disappeared down the driveway. She took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air fill her lungs. It was almost time. 13 years she had waited, planning every detail, every move. David had no idea what was coming, but soon enough, he would know. And when he did, Emma would be there, watching as everything he had built, everything he had taken from her, was torn apart, piece by piece. She turned away from the window, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. The perfect wife was ready to become the perfect destroyer. The day began like any other, with the sun streaming through the windows of their grand home, casting a golden glow over the polished wooden floors. Emma sat at the breakfast table, sipping her coffee, her eyes fixed on the newspaper in front of her, though she wasn't reading a single word. Today was the day. Her heart raced with anticipation, but her face remained calm, composed. David breezed into the kitchen, planting a quick kiss on her cheek. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, grabbing his briefcase and downing the last of his coffee. "I'll be home late tonight. Big meeting with investors." He smiled, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. Emma nodded, offering him a soft smile. "Good luck, darling. I'm sure they'll be impressed as always." He winked at her and headed out the door, his phone already pressed to his ear as he began another day of deals and deceit. Emma watched him go, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. She allowed herself one last moment of hesitation. This was it. After today, nothing would ever be the same. She stood up, taking a deep breath, and walked to her office. The room, once a simple guest bedroom, had been transformed over the years into her command center. She sat at her desk, opened her laptop, and began typing. One by one, she activated the preset commands she had been working on for months. Each keystroke was a nail in David's coffin, a meticulously crafted plan coming to life. First, she transferred the remaining funds from the shell companies into her offshore accounts. Millions of dollars, siphoned off from David's business over the years, were now securely under her control. Then she sent an anonymous email to the authorities, detailing the fraudulent activities David had engaged in, evidence she had carefully compiled and backed up in multiple locations. There was no way he could wriggle out of this one. Next, she initiated a series of trades and transactions that would trigger a chain reaction in the company's stock value. By the time David realized what was happening, it would be too late. The company's shares would plummet, and with them, his reputation and everything he had worked for. She hit the final button and leaned back, watching as the screen filled with confirmation messages. It was done. David was finished. Emma closed the laptop and stood up, feeling an unexpected sense of calm wash over her. She had expected to feel more: elation, triumph, maybe even guilt. But there was nothing, just a quiet, steady satisfaction. She had one. As she moved through the house, she couldn't help but notice how different everything felt. This was the home they had built together, where they had shared countless moments, both good and bad. But now it felt like a stranger's house, a place she no longer belonged. She gathered a few personal items, packed them into a small suitcase, and left it by the door. She wouldn't be coming back. Emma drove to the office, parking in her usual spot. The building loomed above her, a testament to David's ambition and, ultimately, his downfall. She walked through the lobby, nodding to familiar faces, the mask of the perfect wife still firmly in place. She took the elevator to the top floor, where David's office was located, and stepped out into the hushed, carpeted hallway. David was on the phone when she walked in, his face flushed with frustration. He glanced at her, waving her away, but she stood her ground, arms crossed, waiting. Finally, he slammed the phone down, running a hand through his hair. "Emma, this isn't a good time," he snapped. "I'm dealing with a crisis here. The stock is tanking, and no one knows why. I've got lawyers and investors calling me nonstop. I don't have time for whatever this is." She took a step forward, her eyes locked on his. "Oh, I think you'll want to hear this, David." He frowned, confusion and irritation warring on his face. "What are you talking about?" She placed a folder on his desk, the culmination of 13 years of planning, deceit, and patience. "Open it," she said quietly. David hesitated, then snatched up the folder, flipping it open. As he read, his face paled, his eyes widening with disbelief. Inside were copies of the documents she had sent to the authorities, evidence of his financial misconduct, his affair, every lie he had ever told. "You did this?" His voice was barely a whisper, a mix of shock and fury. "You set me up?" Emma's lips curled into a cold smile. "I didn't set you up, David. I just made sure you'd get what you deserved. Every dollar you stole, every lie you told, every person you betrayed. It's all coming back to you now." He stumbled back, his hand gripping the edge of the desk for support. You can't do this. I'll fight it. I'll find a way out of this. I always do." But even as he said the words, Emma could see the desperation in his eyes, the fear. He knew, deep down, that he was beaten. "Go ahead," she said softly. "Fight all you want, but I think you'll find that no one is on your side this time. Your friends, your colleagues, even your precious Lily, they're all gone. I made sure of that." David sank into his chair, his face a mask of disbelief. "Why, Emma? Why do this to me?" She stepped closer, leaning over the desk until their faces were inches apart. 13 years ago, you made me a promise. To love me, to be faithful, to cherish me. And then you broke it, over and over again. You thought you could use me, deceive me, and I would just take it. But you were wrong. I've spent every day since then planning this moment. And now, finally, you get to see what it feels like to have everything ripped away from you. He stared at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and something else. Something like admiration, or maybe respect. "You're a monster," he whispered. Emma straightened, smoothing her skirt with a calm hand. "No, David, I'm just what you made me." And with that, she turned and walked out of his office, leaving him to the chaos she had unleashed. As she rode the elevator down, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time in years, she was free. She walked out of the building and into the bright afternoon sun, the city bustling around her. She took a deep breath, savoring the air, the sounds, the feeling of being alive. David's world was crumbling, but hers was just beginning. She had waited 13 long years for this moment, and it had been worth every second. David sat in his office, the world spinning around him, the air thick with the crushing weight of betrayal and panic. The folder Emma had left on his desk lay open, its contents spread out like the pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite put together. Each document was a dagger, each photograph a wound. His heart pounded in his chest, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly powerless. He reached for his phone, his fingers trembling as he dialed Lily's number. It rang endlessly before going to voicemail. He tried again and again, but there was no answer. Panic surged through him. She couldn't have known, could she? But then he remembered Emma's words. I made sure of that. What had she done? What strings had she pulled while he had been too blind, too arrogant to notice? Desperation clawed at him as he called his lawyers, his business partners, anyone who could help. But the answers were all the same. They couldn't help him now. The evidence was too damning, the charges too severe. And as he listened to the string of rejections, the cold realization set in. He was completely alone. His office door burst open, and two men in suits entered, followed by a woman in a severe black dress. She flashed a badge, her voice firm and emotionless. "Mr. David Prescott, we're with the SEC. You're under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, and insider trading." David stumbled back, his mouth dry. There must be some mistake. I didn't do any of that. The woman's eyes flicked to the papers scattered across his desk, then back to him, her expression unreadable. "We have evidence to the contrary, Mr. Prescott. You'll need to come with us." His world shattered as they handcuffed him, the metal biting into his wrists. The office, the empire he had built, seemed to close in around him, its walls suffocating. He was led out through the crowded lobby, heads turning, whispers following him like a dark cloud. He had always been the man people admired, envied. Now, he was nothing but a cautionary tale. As they drove him away in the unmarked car, his mind raced. How had it all come to this? And then he remembered Emma, sweet, innocent Emma, who had stood by his side all these years, who had never shown an ounce of suspicion or resentment. She had fooled him completely, and now she had destroyed him. Hours later, after a grueling interrogation, he was released on bail, the charges against him piling up. He walked out of the courthouse, the media frenzy blinding him with their camera flashes and shouted questions. He ignored them, his mind focused on one thing only, finding Emma. When he arrived home, the house was dark and empty, its silence mocking him. He stumbled through the rooms, calling her name, his voice echoing back at him. In the living room, he found a single envelope on the coffee table, his name written in her elegant script. He tore it open, his eyes scanning the letter inside. David, You always underestimated me. You saw me as a trophy, a tool to support your image of a perfect life. But you never truly knew me. You thought I was weak, that I would turn a blind eye to your betrayal. But you were wrong. I've spent the last 13 years planning this, every detail, every move. I wanted to break you the way you broke me. And now, as you sit in the ruins of your empire, I hope you understand the depth of your mistake. You took everything from me, but I took it back. And now, I'm free. I've started a new life, one you can't touch, can't even find. While you face the consequences of your actions, I'll be watching from a distance, knowing that I've won. Goodbye, David. Emma. He read the letter over and over. The words blurring his rage and helplessness overwhelmed him. He crumpled the paper in his fist, shouting into the empty house, the sound hollow and meaningless. She was gone, and she had taken everything. His money, his reputation, his very life. The days that followed were a blur of courtrooms and scandal. His assets were frozen, his company dismantled. Every deal he had ever made was scrutinized, every lie exposed. The media feasted on the downfall of the once great David Prescott, and there was no one left to defend him. He tried to contact Lily, but she had vanished, her apartment empty, her phone disconnected. It was as if she had never existed, a figment of his imagination. He hired private investigators to find her, to find Emma, but it was as if they had disappeared into thin air. Weeks turned into months, and David found himself living in a small, rented apartment, his days spent in legal battles and nights in sleepless torment. His lawyers worked tirelessly, but the evidence against him was insurmountable. Emma had seen to that. She had left no stone unturned, no detail overlooked. One evening, as he sat in the dim light of his apartment, the walls closing in on him, he received a package. It was small, wrapped in plain brown paper, with no return address. He opened it cautiously, his heart pounding. Inside was a single item, a photograph. It was a picture of Emma, standing on a sunlit beach, a serene smile on her face. She looked radiant, happier than he had ever seen her, and beside her was a man, tall and handsome, his arm around her shoulders. They looked perfect together, like a couple in love. David's hands shook as he stared at the photo. On the back, in Emma's handwriting, were 3 words, "I found peace." He let the photo slip from his fingers, his vision blurring with tears of rage and despair. She had moved on, found happiness, while he was left to rot in the ruins of his life. She had won. For the first time, he truly understood what she had taken from him. Not just his money or his reputation, but his very sense of self. She had waited 13 years for her revenge, and now, as he sat in the darkness of his own making, he realized that he would never escape it. He was trapped in a prison of his own making, haunted by the memory of the woman who had outplayed him at every turn. And as the shadows closed in around him, he knew that this was his punishment. Emma had taken everything, even his hope, and left him with nothing but regret. He whispered her name into the empty room, but there was no answer. There would never be an answer. Emma was gone, and she had left him to face the darkness alone. Emma stood on the balcony of her villa, overlooking the azure waters of the Mediterranean Sea. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow across the horizon. A gentle breeze rustled through the palm trees, carrying with it the scent of salt and jasmine. She took a deep breath, feeling the peace and tranquility of this place seep into her very soul. It had been 6 months since she had walked out of David's office, leaving him with the carefully constructed evidence of his downfall. 6 months since she had watched from a distance as his empire crumbled, as he faced public humiliation and legal ruin. She had followed the news closely in those early days, every headline, every article detailing his descent into disgrace, a small, bitterly satisfying victory. But as time passed, the satisfaction faded, replaced by a strange, hollow feeling. She had spent so many years focused on destroying David that she hadn't thought much about what came next. Revenge had consumed her, defined her, and now that it was over, she was left with a sense of emptiness. Emma looked down at the wine glass in her hand, the dark red liquid shimmering in the fading light. She swirled it slowly, lost in thought. She had everything she had ever wanted now: freedom, wealth, power. She had started her own company, investing the money she had taken from David into legitimate ventures. Her businesses were thriving, and she was respected, even admired, in her new world. And yet, something was missing. She turned and walked back into the house, the open, airy space filled with soft, luxurious furnishings. It was a beautiful home, far more opulent than the one she had shared with David, yet it felt strangely empty. She moved to her desk, where a stack of letters lay unopened. They were from people she had known in her old life, friends who had reached out after the scandal broke, offering sympathy or seeking to reconnect. She had ignored them all. That life, those people, felt like a distant memory, part of a world she had left behind. But now, as she looked at the letters, she wondered if she had made a mistake. She had spent so long pretending, so long hiding her true self, that she wasn't sure who she was anymore. She sat down and picked up the top letter, her fingers tracing the familiar handwriting. It was from her sister, Sarah, whom she hadn't spoken to in years. She had pushed Sarah away, along with everyone else, during the years she was with David, isolating herself in her pursuit of revenge. She hadn't wanted anyone to see the pain, the anger that simmered beneath the surface. But now, she found herself missing the connection, the sense of belonging she had once had. Emma opened the letter and began to read. Sarah's words were kind, filled with concern and love. She wrote about her own life, her children, her happiness. And then, at the end, a simple plea: "Please come home, Emma. We miss you." Emma set the letter down, her chest tight. She had left everything behind when she walked out on David, and she had never looked back. But now, as she sat in this beautiful house, surrounded by the trappings of her new life, she realized that she had lost more than just a cheating husband. She had lost herself. The next day, she booked a flight. It was time to go back, to face the people she had left behind, to find out if there was a place for her in the world she had abandoned. The journey felt surreal, like stepping back into a dream she had forgotten. As the plane touched down, she felt a nervous anticipation she hadn't experienced in years. When she arrived at Sarah's house, the door opened almost immediately. Sarah stood there, her eyes wide with shock and then filling with tears. They embraced, and for the first time in a long while, Emma felt the tightness in her chest begin to ease. They sat together, talking late into the night, sharing stories, laughter, and tears. Emma told her everything: about David, about the revenge, about the emptiness that followed. And Sarah listened, holding her hand, her eyes filled with compassion and love. "You did what you had to do, Emma," Sarah said softly. "But now you need to let it go. You need to find yourself again." Emma nodded, feeling the truth of her sister's words. She had been lost for so long, consumed by anger and hatred. It was time to heal, to build a new life. Not on the ashes of the old, but on something real, something true. Over the next few weeks, Emma reconnected with the people she had once cared about. She visited old friends, rekindled relationships, and found, to her surprise, that they still cared about her, still wanted her in their lives. It wasn't easy. There were questions, awkward moments, lingering mistrust. But slowly, she felt herself coming back to life. She spent time with Sarah's children, laughing as they played in the backyard, their innocent joy a balm to her wounded soul. She helped her sister in the garden, the simple, grounding work a stark contrast to the complex games she had played for so long. And she found, to her amazement, that she was happy. One evening, as she sat on the porch with Sarah, watching the sun set over the hills, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She still thought about David sometimes, wondered what had become of him, but it was a distant, fading pain, like an old scar. She had taken her revenge, but it hadn't given her what she thought it would. Only now, surrounded by love and acceptance, was she starting to understand what she truly needed. Emma turned to her sister, her heart light. "I think I'm finally ready to move on, Sarah." Sarah smiled, squeezing her hand. "I'm glad, Emma. You deserve to be happy." And for the first time in a very long time, Emma believed it. She had spent 13 years plotting her revenge, and in the end, she had won. But the real victory, she realized now, wasn't in destroying David. It was in finding herself again, in rediscovering the woman she had once been before the betrayal, before the anger. It was in letting go of the past and embracing the future. As the stars twinkled overhead and the cool night air wrapped around them, Emma felt a sense of contentment she had never thought possible. She had come a long way, and there was still a long road ahead. But she was no longer running from the past. She was walking toward the future, one step at a time, and for the first time, she knew she was on the right path. Emma closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and smiled. She was free, truly free, and it felt like coming home. Several months passed, and Emma found herself growing more and more at peace with each passing day. She had rented a small cottage not far from Sarah's home, nestled in a quiet, picturesque town surrounded by rolling hills and lush forests. The cottage was modest compared to her villa on the Mediterranean, but it was cozy and felt more like a home than any place she had lived in for a long time. She spent her days reconnecting with old hobbies and discovering new passions. She took up painting, her canvases filled with vibrant landscapes inspired by the nature around her. She volunteered at the local community center, teaching a small business course to women who wanted to start their own ventures. It was rewarding in a way that managing David's empire never had been, and she found herself looking forward to each new day. But even as she built this new life, David's shadow still lingered at the edges of her consciousness. She avoided reading the news, not wanting to know what had become of him. Yet, the unanswered question of his fate gnawed at her, a loose thread that she knew she would eventually have to tug on to find closure. One crisp autumn morning, Emma decided it was time to know. She drove to the nearest city and visited a small, discreet internet cafe. The cafe was nearly empty, the only sound the soft clacking of keyboards and the hum of an old air conditioner. Emma sat down at a computer and took a deep breath before typing David's name into the search engine. The results were numerous: articles, opinion pieces, even a few scandalous documentaries detailing his downfall. She clicked on the most recent news article and began to read. It turned out that David's legal battles had dragged on for months, but in the end, he had been sentenced to 5 years in prison for fraud and embezzlement. His assets had been seized, his property sold, and his reputation utterly destroyed. Emma felt a strange mix of emotions as she read. She had expected to feel triumphant, to relish his misery, but instead, she felt only a deep, hollow sadness. She had achieved everything she had set out to do. David was ruined, his empire dismantled, his freedom taken. But there was no satisfaction in it, no victory. It was just over. She sat back in her chair, staring at the screen. David was paying for his sins, and she supposed that was justice. But she realized now that it was not the kind of justice that healed wounds or righted wrongs. It was simply the end of a long, bitter story. Emma closed the browser and left the cafe, the crisp autumn air biting at her cheeks. She walked through the bustling city streets, her thoughts a tangled mess. What had all those years of planning and plotting really been for? She had spent so much time focused on making David suffer that she had lost sight of what she truly wanted: a life of her own, free from the pain and bitterness that had consumed her. She found herself in a small park, the trees shedding their golden leaves in a gentle breeze. Children played on the swings, their laughter ringing out like bells. Emma sat on a bench, watching them, her heart aching with a longing she hadn't felt in years. As she watched the children, a memory surfaced, one she had buried deep. She had wanted children once, had dreamed of a family with David, a life filled with love and joy. But that dream had died long before she ever found out about his affair. It had withered away as their marriage crumbled under the weight of his lies and betrayals. Emma closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. She had lost so much more than just time. She had lost a part of herself, the part that had believed in love and trust, in the simple happiness of a life shared with someone else. She had been so focused on revenge that she had never allowed herself to grieve for what she had truly lost. She wiped the tear away and took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over her. It was time to let go, not just of David, but of the past, of the pain and the anger. It was time to stop being the woman who had been wronged, the woman who had sought revenge. It was time to start being Emma again, whoever that might be. That evening, as she sat by the fireplace in her cottage, Emma took out a blank sheet of paper and a pen. She began to write, not knowing exactly what she wanted to say, just letting the words flow from her heart. She wrote about her pain, about her anger, about the years she had lost. She wrote about her regrets, her fears, and finally, her hopes. When she was done, she folded the letter and placed it in an envelope, sealing it with a sigh of relief. She wrote David on the front and set it aside. She had no intention of sending it. It was simply a way to say goodbye, to close that chapter of her life once and for all. The next day, she drove to a nearby hill where a small, secluded garden overlooked the valley below. It was a place she had discovered during one of her walks, a place that had become her sanctuary. She stood there, holding the letter, and watched as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. With a deep breath, she set the letter on fire, watching as the flames consumed the paper, turning it to ash. She let the wind carry the ashes away, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. It was done. She was free. In the weeks that followed, Emma felt lighter, more at peace than she had in years. She threw herself into her new life with renewed energy, expanding her business, making new friends, and even beginning to date again. It was strange, navigating this new world of possibilities, but it was also exhilarating. One day, as she sat with Sarah and her family, watching the children play in the yard, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. She had spent so many years thinking that revenge would bring her closure, that it would heal the wounds David had inflicted. But now she knew that true healing came from within, from letting go of the past and embracing the future. And as she looked around at the people she loved, at the life she was building, Emma finally felt that she was where she was meant to be. The darkness of her past was behind her, and she was stepping into the light, ready to live, to love, and to be truly happy. For the first time in 13 years, Emma Prescott felt like she was truly home. 1 year had passed since Emma had let go of her past, watching David's letter turn to ash. She had built a new life for herself, running a foundation for women entrepreneurs, traveling, and speaking about resilience and rebuilding. Yet, despite her newfound peace, there were still moments when the shadows of her old life crept in, tugging at her thoughts. One evening, she received a phone call from an unknown number. It was the warden of Greenfield Correctional Facility informing her that David had requested to speak with her. "He's not well," the warden said, and although Emma initially declined, the words haunted her. Against her better judgment, she found herself agreeing to visit him, driven by a need for closure. The next day, she arrived at the prison, her heart heavy with a mix of dread and curiosity. She was led to a small visitation room where she waited, her thoughts swirling. When David finally walked in, Emma barely recognized him. He was a shadow of the man she had once known, thinner, older, his face lined with regret and fatigue. "Emma," he whispered, sitting down across from her. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the silence filled with years of unspoken pain. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice trembling, "for everything. I know I can't undo what I did, but I needed to tell you that." Emma felt a strange mixture of emotions: anger, pity, and, unexpectedly, a sense of release. "Why now?" she asked, her voice steady. He looked down at his hands. "I'm dying. Cancer. They say I have a few months, maybe less. I needed to see you. To apologize." The revelation hit her like a wave, leaving her breathless. All the anger she had held onto for so long seemed to evaporate, replaced by a profound sadness for what could have been. She had spent so many years consumed by hatred and revenge, but now, looking at the broken man before her, she realized that it no longer mattered.